Imagine yourself alone in the darkness of the Rocky Mountains, when a stranger emerges from the shadows holding a knife. Can you feel the tension? My hands were shaking as fear mixed with the night. It was just the beginning of a night I will never forget. Stay tuned until the end to uncover how a roadside stop turned into a scary encounter that could have ended in tragedy. Don't blink, for the truth is darker than you imagine. It was well past midnight when I decided to pull my truck over to the side of the highway. I was exhausted after driving non-stop for hours, and the weight of my 20 years of experience as a trucker seemed to pull me down. At 53, I knew the dangers of the road all too well, especially in the Canadian Rocky Mountains where I found myself now. The silence was deafening as I turned off the engine. Darkness swallowed everything around, except for the faint glow of stars above. I stepped out of the cabin, stretching my numb legs and breathing in the cold mountain air. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my nostrils, bringing a familiar sense of loneliness. I walked to the back of the truck, where I kept my small camping kit. Even on quick stops, I always preferred to set up my tent rather than sleep in the cramped cabin. It was my little ritual, a way to feel more connected to the world beyond the road. As I set up the tent, my thoughts wandered to the stories circulating among truckers. Scary truck driver campfire stories were not uncommon, but I always took them with a pinch of salt. After all, having spent so many years on the road, I had seen my fair share of strange things, but nothing that couldn't be explained by fatigue or an overactive imagination. With the tent set up, I sat at the entrance, lighting a cigarette and gazing at the empty road. The occasional glimmer of distant headlights was the only indication that I wasn't completely alone on this desolate stretch. As the smoke mingled with the night air, I wondered how many scary trucker stories had begun on nights like this, in places as isolated as this. I stubbed out my cigarette and prepared to enter the tent when a strange noise caught my attention. It was a muffled sound, almost imperceptible, coming from the dense forest bordering the highway. My body tensed up, years of experience on the road making me alert to any anomaly. I stood still, trying to discern the sound. It could be just an animal, I thought, attempting to calm my nerves, but something about that noise seemed different. It wasn't the characteristic noise of a deer or a bear. It was something more human. Slowly, I took the flashlight from the pocket of my jacket. The beam of light sliced through the darkness like a knife, revealing the motionless trees and mist forming on the forest floor. I swept the area with the light, my heart racing with each passing second. That's when I saw it. A quick movement between the trees, just for an instant, but unmistakable. A human figure. My mind immediately evoked all the scary truck driver horror stories I had ever heard. Terrifying truck stops, mysterious encounters on the road. I had always thought they were just stories to spook truckers, but in that moment, each one of them felt terrifyingly real. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry as paper. "Is there someone there?" I shouted, my voice shaking slightly. There was no response, only the oppressive silence of the night. I decided it was time to leave. Quickly, I began to dismantle the tent, my fingers clumsy with haste and growing fear. As I struggled with the tent, I heard approaching footsteps. My heart hammered in my chest, and I spun around abruptly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The light revealed a man standing just a few meters away. He was dirty, with torn clothes and an empty gaze that chilled me to the bone. "I need help," he said, his voice hoarse and devoid of emotion. Instinctively, I took a step back, my mind racing through all the scary trucker stories I had heard. This was the kind of encounter that usually ended badly in such narratives. "What kind of help?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man took a step forward, and I could see that he was holding something in his hand. My blood ran cold when I realized it was a kitchen knife. "I came here to end it all," he spoke, tears now visible in his eyes. "But I can't do it. I thought of my daughters and I can't." His voice broke on the last word, and he fell to his knees, sobbing. The situation was surreal. Here I was, in a terrifying truck stop, living what could easily become one of the scariest trucker campfire stories ever told. But at the same time, before me stood a man who was clearly broken, desperately in need of help. My heart pounded as I assessed the situation. The man remained on his knees, sobbing, the knife still in his trembling hand. All my years of experience as a trucker hadn't prepared me for this moment. Scary trucker stories usually ended in tragedy or escape. But I knew I couldn't just drive away. "Look, buddy," I began, keeping my voice calm. "Let's talk about this, okay? But first, how about you put that knife down?" I watched carefully as he hesitated, then slowly placed the knife on the wet grass. Cautiously, I approached him, maintaining a safe distance. "I'll call the police, all right? They can help." He nodded silently, his body still shaking with suppressed sobs. As I dialed the emergency number, I kept my eyes fixed on him. The call was brief. I explained the situation and our location. The operator assured me that a patrol car would be on its way shortly. The minutes that followed seemed to drag on. We talked, or rather I spoke, and he occasionally responded with nods. I spoke about life on the road, the beauties I had seen, and the challenges I had faced. I tried to show him that no matter how dark the night seems, there is always a dawn waiting. When the lights of the police car finally pierced the darkness, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The officers approached with caution, but the man offered no resistance. Before they took him away, I looked into his eyes and said, "Remember your daughters. They need you. Be strong for them." As I watched the patrol car drive away, I realized I had just lived through one of the most intense experiences of my career as a trucker. It wasn't a ghost story on the road or a supernatural trucker tale, but it was real, visceral, and deeply human. Quietly, I dismantled my tent, reflecting on what had transpired. When I returned to the cabin of my truck, the sky was beginning to brighten on the horizon. I started the engine, feeling the familiar rumble under my feet. As I merged back onto the highway, I knew I would carry this story with me for a long time, not as one of those scary trucker stories we often share, but as a reminder of human fragility and the importance of reaching out to help, even in the most unexpected situations. The highway stretched before me, infinite and full of possibilities, and I, as always, continued on my journey, carrying the experiences of that night with me, ready to face whatever the next stretch of the road might bring. Imagine yourself alone, in the middle of a deserted mountain road, when suddenly something starts moving in your truck. You're about to find out what really happened that night, and I assure you, it wasn't a bear or an ordinary thief. Get ready for a chilling story that will make you think twice before pulling over again. Stay with me until the end, and you won't believe what I saw. I've been driving the roads of this country as a trucker for 10 years now. At 45, I know every curve and truck stop in the U.S. like the back of my hand. I work for a large transportation company, hauling cargo from coast to coast. My home is the cabin of my Peterbilt 579, a steel giant that accompanies me on all my journeys. On that night, I was on the route from Tucson, Arizona to Salt Lake City, Utah. It was a trip I had made hundreds of times, but this time would be different. The main highway was closed due to a sudden flood, forcing me to take a detour through the mountains in southern Utah. Scary trucker stories always mentioned these back roads, but I never paid much attention to them. The sun had set hours ago when I started feeling the weight of exhaustion on my eyes. I decided it was time to pull over and get some rest. I found a wide enough shoulder to park my truck safely. I was in the middle of nowhere, with the nearest town at least 40 miles away. The darkness was absolute. Not even the moonlight could penetrate the dense clouds covering the sky. I turned off the engine and the lights, plunging everything into a sepulchral silence, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, searching for any sound. I climbed up to the bunk at the back of the cabin, my makeshift bed during the long trips. As I settled in for sleep, I couldn't help but think of the scary truck driver campfire stories that circulated among us. But I was a road veteran, and nothing scared me anymore, or so I thought. Little did I know that this night would become one of the most terrifying trucker experiences of my life. A story that I would tell to rookies as an example of the dangers of terrifying truck stops. I closed my eyes, trying to push those thoughts away, and soon fell into a deep sleep, lulled by the familiar sound of the wind buffeting against the metal siding of my faithful road companion. The digital clock on the dashboard read 4:00 a.m. When I woke up with a start, my heart raced as I heard a strange noise coming from outside. Something or someone was fiddling with the air and power cables between the cabin and the trailer. The sound was so close it felt like it was just inches from my head, separated only by the thin metal wall of the cabin. I froze, barely daring to breathe. The scary trucker stories I had always dismissed as exaggeration now seemed terrifyingly real. My mind raced, imagining who or what could be out there in the middle of nowhere at 4 a.m. Thieves? Some wild animal? The possibilities were endless and increasingly frightening. Suddenly, I felt a substantial weight climb onto the rear platform of the truck. The entire vehicle shook with the impact. I quickly calculated, by the movement, it must be something weighing between 200 and 300 pounds. Too big to be a common thief. My first thought was a bear or a mountain lion, creatures I knew inhabited the mountains of Utah. Fear gave way to adrenaline. I knew I had to do something, and fast. I decided the best strategy was to scare whatever was out there. Gathering all my courage, I raised my hand and slapped the wall of the cabin hard. The sound echoed in the silent night like a gunshot. What happened next chilled me to the bone. A male scream of sheer terror ripped through the air. The weight on the platform disappeared abruptly, followed by the sound of something or someone falling to the ground. But the worst was yet to come. Within seconds, the air was filled with the screams of at least a dozen other voices. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my throat. This wasn't an animal. They were people, lots of people. And for some reason they were all around my truck in the middle of the night, on a deserted mountain road in Utah. At that moment, every scary trucker story I had ever heard seemed like child's play compared to what I was experiencing. Panic took over. My mind raced with thoughts of paranormal trucker stories and mysterious encounters on the road. But I knew I had to act. With trembling hands, I jumped into the driver's seat and turned on the truck's lights, illuminating the darkness around me. What I saw left me speechless. They weren't ghosts or supernatural creatures. They were soldiers. An entire group of men dressed in military uniforms was scattered around my truck. Some lying on the ground, others in defensive positions. Their faces wore a mixture of shock and confusion that probably mirrored my own. I slowly opened the cabin door and stepped out, keeping my hands visible. "What's going on here?" I shouted, my voice still trembling with adrenaline. One of the soldiers, apparently the leader, stepped forward. "Sir, we apologize for the disturbance. We're from the Army Reserve, conducting nighttime capture exercises." As he explained, the situation started to make sense. They were looking for an abandoned truck as part of their training. The target vehicle was a few miles away, and they hadn't expected to find an occupied truck on this remote stretch of road. When they saw me, they thought I was part of the exercise. I explained that I was just a trucker taking a rest stop. I mentioned my military past, which helped break the ice. Soon we were all laughing about the absurd situation. The group leader had to use the radio to inform his commanding officer about the misunderstanding and ensure that the other squads didn't bother me. As I watched the soldiers reorganize and continue their exercise, I couldn't help but think how reality can sometimes be stranger than fiction. There I was in the middle of nowhere, living one of the most unusual experiences of my career as a trucker. After the unexpected encounter with the soldiers, I returned to the cabin of my Peterbilt, but sleep had completely abandoned me. As the sky began to brighten on the horizon, I started the engine and decided to resume my journey. The wheels rolled on the asphalt, but my mind kept replaying the events of the previous night. I smiled to myself, thinking about how this experience would become one of my favorite stories to share at truck stops. As the sun rose, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, I reflected on the lessons that night had taught me. After 15 years on the road, I thought I had seen it all. But the truth is, life as a trucker always has something new to surprise us. I realized that the scary stories circulating among truckers weren't just tales to spook rookies. They served as constant reminders to always stay alert and prepared for the unexpected. The road is unpredictable, And each stop, each bend, may hide a new adventurer, a new challenge. As I drove towards Salt Lake City, my final destination, I felt a newfound appreciation for my job and the trucker community. We were all storytellers, sharing our experiences to keep each other safe and entertained during the long, solitary hours on the road. I decided that when I reached the next stop, I would call my wife and kids. I'd tell them about my nocturnal adventure, knowing they would laugh and worry at the same time. That's how we maintained our connection, even with the thousands of miles that often separated us. When I finally arrived in Salt Lake City, exhausted but satisfied, I realized I had gained more than just a good story to tell. I had been reminded of why I loved this job so much. The constant promise of something new, the camaraderie among truckers, and the feeling of freedom that only the open road can provide. I parked my truck at the depot, ready to unload and prepare for the next trip. As I closed the cabin door, I gave the dashboard an affectionate pat. My old Peterbilt and I had been through yet another adventure together, and I knew there would be many more to come. After all, in the life of a trucker, each journey is a new story waiting to be told, and I couldn't wait to see what the next road had in store for me. Try to imagine this. You, alone on the road at 2 a.m., your headlights slicing through the darkness, and suddenly 2 figures lying right in your path. Is it a trap, an illusion, or something even more sinister? Join me, because this true story of a veteran trucker will keep you up at night. Don't miss it. I've been a truck driver for over 2 decades. At 47, I've seen it all on these roads. My name doesn't matter, but my story does. I work for a transportation company in Minnesota, specializing in high-priority deliveries. On that fateful night, I was on my way to Montana, hauling an extremely valuable tractor part. The clock struck 2 a.m. as I entered North Dakota. The road ahead was a flat, endless stretch of asphalt. The rumble of the engine was my only company as I fought against fatigue. I had heard many scary trucker stories, but I always dismissed them as exaggerations or urban legends. The night was particularly dark, with clouds obscuring the stars. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only a few meters ahead. The radio crackled, unable to pick up any signal in that vastness. It was just me, my truck, and the road. Nothing else. As I drove down the highway, I started to feel that familiar highway hypnosis. The white lines blurred hypnotically, almost inviting me to close my eyes. I shook my head, determined to stay focused. After all, I'd been through this hundreds of times before. It was just another work night, or so I thought. That's when I noticed something strange on the road. At first, I thought it was just another piece of tire left behind by some unlucky trucker. But as I drew closer, I realized it was something much bigger, something that occupied my entire lane. My heart started racing. At that moment, I didn't know that I was about to experience one of the scariest trucker horror stories I've ever heard. I slowed down, my eyes fixed on the strange shape ahead. As I approached, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't a piece of tire, nor a dead animal. They were 2 people, lying on the road, head to toe, occupying my entire lane. My first instinct was to stop and help. After all, they might be injured or in need of assistance. But something held me back. A small voice in the back of my mind warned me that something wasn't right. I remembered the scary truck driver campfire stories the veterans told at rest stops. With my heart hammering in my chest, I swerved to the other lane, barely missing the figures lying on the asphalt. I drove past them slowly, expecting to see some movement, some sign of life, but they remained still, like mannequins abandoned in a dark display window. I stopped the truck a few meters ahead, my mind in conflict. Part of me wanted to go back and check if they were okay. The other part screamed for me to keep driving and not look back. That's when a memory surfaced, as clear as if it had happened yesterday. Years ago, an old grizzled trucker told me about a trick used by thieves in remote areas. They would lie down on the road pretending to need help. When a well-intentioned driver stopped, they would be attacked and robbed, sometimes even killed. That story, which I had dismissed as a tale of paranormal truckers, now seemed terrifyingly real. I looked in the rearview mirror, my heart almost stopping. The two figures had gotten up and were walking towards the shoulder. I needed no further warning. I shifted gears and floored the accelerator, leaving behind that surreal scene. The haunted highways that I always thought were myths now seemed frighteningly real. My heart was pounding as I sped down the dark road. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. That scary trucker experience had rattled me more than I cared to admit. I drove for hours without stopping, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors. With every turn, with every shadow on the road, I expected to see those sinister figures again. The weight of the tractor part in the trailer felt even heavier now, like a magnet drawing danger. When the sun finally began to tint the horizon pink, I allowed myself to relax a little. I stopped at a rest area, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the night, analyzing every detail. Did I overreact? Maybe they were really people in need of help? I called the police as soon as I got cell signal. I explained what had happened, but the attendant's skeptical tone told me that probably nothing would be done. We were too far from civilization, and my report sounded like just another one of the many scary road stories they probably heard regularly. While sipping a bitter coffee at the truck stop diner, I overheard other drivers sharing their own terrifying trucker stories. Tales of mysterious encounters, terrifying truck stops, and scary campsites. I realized that my experience, as frightening as it was not unique. I resumed my journey at sunrise, determined to deliver the load on time. The daylight brought some comfort, but it couldn't completely dispel the sense of unease that the previous night had left. The vast plains of North Dakota, which once seemed monotonous, now held an air of mystery and potential danger. I arrived in Montana just before noon. As they unloaded the tractor part, I shared my experience with some local colleagues. To my surprise, many of them had heard of similar incidents. One of them even mentioned having gone through something similar on that same road a few months back. I then realized that I had involuntarily joined a select group of truckers who had faced the unexplained on the roads. My trucker horror story was no longer just mine. It became part of a larger set of narratives that circulated among us, as warnings and reminders of the dangers lurking in the shadows of the highways. On my way back, I remained vigilant, but the tension of the previous night had dissipated. I reflected on how the experience had changed my perspective. The trucker ghost stories I used to dismiss now carried a weight of truth. Life on the road, which I thought I knew so well, revealed itself to be full of mysteries and unexpected dangers. When I got home, I silently thanked that old grizzled trucker whose advice probably saved me. I realized that his story, just as mine now, was part of an oral tradition among truck drivers, a way to keep ourselves safe and alert during the long, solitary nights on the road. And as I prepared for my next trip, I knew that I would carry with me not only the load in the trailer, but also a new awareness of the secrets and perils that the roads hold in the shadows of the night. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.